So now that I've proven the science, would you like to learn some more? So they said you can't teach an old dog new tricks. We're now on to cats. When the cat takes your tongue. Now, it's quite interesting. Why would your tongue, what's your tongue got to do with being able to speak out? Well, when it comes to fear, we have 12 cranial nerves. They're kind of important. If you lose one, you're in trouble. 6 of them are dedicated and connected to our tongue. So the tongue is quite an important piece of equipment. And when the cat's got it, or when fear has it, you will not speak. Interesting. What if you've got something on Plato's wall that's scaring the bejesus out of you? So your tongue won't allow you to speak. Your smart brain, by the way, will not be functioning. So you will then opt for what Theodore Litz called a folie à deux. Now you turn to your loved one, your partner, and you're chatting. Your partner says, well, I'll wash my hands, I'll drink a little bit more water, I'll do what the media tell me. And then they tell you it's the science. Don't forget, the science. So then, as you following their lead, Lids realize if the rest of your family get involved, it becomes a folie en famille, yeah? The whole family have become delusional. Now, anybody from a delusional family in here? Maybe, or just, oh, yeah, good. I share that one. So, Lids found that in order to create that delusional family, we needed to have one parent, yeah? Maybe your mother, maybe your father, but one parent who was never checked. And that delusional parent would, in the land of neuro-linguistic programming, there would be no my. No rules for me, my rules for you. Yeah? That also goes under the guise of do as I say, not as I do. Some of you might recognize this. Or one rule for me, another for thee. Now then, if that rule maker continues to go unchecked, if they continue to break the rules, and the media continues to tell you that they're breaking the rules, you think, yes, something's going to happen to them. The truth of the matter is nothing's going to happen to them because it's one elaborate hoax. They're supposed to tell you they're being caught. And the reason they're supposed to tell you they're being caught is because this creates compliance. More and more compliance. And then the folie à deux increases. So we have this rule structure which I came up with thanks to a Dutch friend of mine 10 years ago, Henk Belliers, and we discussed what unconscious rule structure must be present in a human being to allow them to remain inside an abusive relationship. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in an abusive relationship with our governments. The reason being, we are in a paternal system. Our leaders are unconsciously our parents. And if those unconscionable parents are allowed to continue in a no-my rule structure, that will encourage more and more compliance. So, Stockholm Syndrome. That's what we're talking about. And there's some really interesting facts about Stockholm Syndrome. If I threatened you guys and said, nobody's allowed to leave, otherwise I'll have you executed, I only have to keep you here for a couple of days. And then so long as I let one or two of you use the toilet, you'll fall in love with me. That's basically Stockholm Syndrome. So in England, our Prime Minister allowed us to have Christmas. What a beautiful man. He allowed us to have Christmas. So that increases, according to the science, that increases Stockholm Syndrome. So at least when you leave here today, you'll understand why this was an unprecedented event. Why it had never happened before. Because they needed to install a fear in you that you would not have accepted unless it was new, novel, unprecedented. And then, as soon as you're wide open, they inflicted Stockholm Syndrome on the masses. Now here's the beauty of it. Oh, this is Plato's cave in the 21st century. If you have someone, I mean, imagine, this probably wouldn't happen over here, but in England it's happening. Yeah, it would never happen over here. But in England, we have people going on television who have been elected leaders, and they're telling lies. We know they're telling lies. Even they, as one of the pictures showed us earlier, they know, we know, everybody knows. But the reason they're doing it, it encourages more and more Stockholm Syndrome. And we end up with a folly on society. Yeah? A folly on society. And that is the nature of my new book, which is Family Rules. And if any of you have ever seen the movie The Godfather, you'll know family rules. And it would appear that an awful lot of people are in that global delusion. So that's why we can't say what we see. But am I going to leave you there in despair and misery? I hope not, she says. So, 2019, no pandemic, we're looking to clear trauma. People with psychophysiological dis-ease. We want to help. We want to help so badly, we made it free, yeah? So you can download it. We launched. We've got over 15,000 downloads so far. It's increasing. And basically, I have to tell you how it works. Remember that emotional memory image? It's stored in front of you. It's inside your mind. Many of you are already nodding. Now, there's a paid-for version, which please feel free if you'd like to pay, but there's a free version. So what happens is, there's cutting-edge software in here. So the app itself will scan your eyes, and it'll create an intervention. Now, this is for visual trauma. So as long as you have an image here, it will help clear it. And you can use it as often as you like. But if you have an auditory trauma, yeah, we have a new piece of software coming out soon. So that's it. Split second on learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. Take a moment to have a look at this app, because it is, you're moving into the quantum field in this app. It's part of a new way forward and a new understanding. And just take a breath and just explore it. That's all I say. Now I'd like to introduce our next speaker. We have David Charalambos. He's the founder of Reaching People. David has an exceptional skills in NLP, EFT, system theory, process mapping dynamics, and communications. He is a consultant for many scientific and academic groups, and about understanding behavioral science and perception, and how effectively to message and run campaigns. over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so put your hand up if you've had a challenging conversation for the last 2 years where you thought someone would listen and change their mind and they didn't. Okay, it should be literally every single person in this room. The question is why? Why all of a sudden did it get so difficult? Well, the thing is, it's always been difficult to talk to someone that has different views, but now the volume was turned right up. Now, if you do want to talk to someone with different views, one of the things that we have to understand more than anything else is effectively divide and conquer and what drives conflict and prejudice. So on our project, we have a couple of characters that we use as examples, like members of the public, and we have Jane blogs and we have Joe blogs. And effectively, in a conversation, we both stand on a soapbox and we project this into the conversation. In the soapbox is all of our memories, our belief systems, what we know to be true about the world, the reservoir of all the information that we have. And we effectively not only project it, but every fact that we see, we filter through that understanding. And it's only when we look in the soapbox that it will begin to become apparent why conversations are so strained. So Joe thinks that the media reports the truth. He thinks that they're independent and they're not owned. He thinks that the government's there to serve him as a person and provide for his needs. He thinks that, if everyone's doing it, it must be a good idea. He thinks if someone says something's safe, then it must be. He trusts the institutions. He trusts that there's enough oversight. And he thinks, and this is a really key one, that there is scientific consensus. And of course there would be if you delete anyone that has anything against the consensus. Jane, on the other hand, she knows that there's a huge amount of censorship. She knows there's conflicts of interest. She knows that non-government organizations have got their fingers in many pies. She knows media is effectively a corporation. She distrusts the government. She must have read a history book. And she knows that science, just as much as any other industry, can be influenced. So now if we imagine that Jane presents a fact to Joe, they're going to see every fact completely differently. And this is the key. This is why we've all presented facts and they just get rejected. And we've studied this intensively to understand the elements that we have to go through to be able to have a really good, open and honest conversation. And possibly the most important, or certainly one of the top three, is to understand the divide and conquer. So, and of course, what we've got now is that Joe's soapbox, as well as everyone's, is being unconsciously influenced by the propaganda, the behavioral science, and everything else. Now, behavioral science has made some startling discoveries about why we make decisions and why we behave the way we behave. When we understand it, we start to get answers to what's happened in the last 2 years, and when we can start to understand some solutions. So what we have here is a very famous story, and in all the war times you have many really interesting stories of how people can overcome such huge divide. So this is Christmas time, 1914. They have a ceasefire. So both sides go into no man's land to recover the bodies. And then the strangest thing happened. They started helping each other recover the bodies, and then they started help each other dig the graves for those that passed away. And then they started exchanging addresses. They were going to talk about communicating after the war. So in the space of a few hours, they started to bridge the divide because they were working towards a common goal. And then famously, they actually had a football match. They didn't want to fight anymore. They had already recognized that no longer were they orientating to a different soldier. They were now looking at another human. It required officers to go and threaten to shoot each side if they didn't start fighting again. So our natural tendencies when we connect is to actually collaborate. So what I'm going to touch on today is that it's such an important thing that if you want to reach people and you want to overcome these things, until you overcome this one thing, nothing else tends to work. We've tried everything, but if you don't overcome this, it stops. So we're going to show you 10 points that are very key. So British psychologist Henry Tajfel, he wanted to understand what created prejudice, what created conflict. So he got loads of people together, he put them into the two groups, and he was trying to then add things in to work out what it was. But the most astonishing thing happened. There was no baseline. No baseline. And what do we mean? So effectively, you only need three elements present to create divide and conquer, to create two groups that will fight each other. All you need is a label. Okay? And then the people identify with that label. And then they compare themselves to the other group. So whether it's vaccinated, unvaccinated, conspiracy theorists, following the science, whatever it is, you just create two labels. That's all he had to do. And they created labels of, blue team, orange team, and all this. And then the divide starts. So we have to be very, very careful what we're talking about, how we refer to other people if we want to reach them. Because in the story we told of the First World War, the people went from them to us. And that's the change. When everything is us, humanity together, it all changes. So some of the points that are really key is that now, if we look at the labels here, say anti, we all know what that means, and pro XYZ, you'll see that the propaganda was literally creating the labels. And then it was creating the comparison to make one group immoral, to create that aggression from one group to the other. So we saw this everywhere. This is the funny one, how to talk to your conspiracy friend. So it's creating the labels. And that's why they're so powerful, because when you talk to people, if they, you're one of those, they will dismiss everything you say. This is what groups do. When two groups in opposition, they do not listen to each other. So if you want to convince someone, you first got to let them know you're in their corner. So we have a tendency to orientate to what we think the group is. So effectively, each group has a caricature which the media paints. And then when someone talks to you, they're not talking to you, they're talking to the group. So if the group is painted as immoral, you will be painted as immoral, which is why you have to connect to them as human. New norms kick in. So this is like when people join cults, or they join gangs, or they join anything that's this group, they start adopting the behavior of the group. So that's why you'll see people, when they became part of these groups, they started acting very strange. Groups are more suspicious and more aggressive than individuals. We get this de-individualization, which is when people are on riots, they start acting very unlike themselves. This is why the media can really start to get people to act very strange. So you'll see lots of aggression when people are in groups. And of course the marches have to be very careful not to turn aggressive. A key thing is, the group then favors their own group over everyone else. So you see this, our glorious leader, our great religion, our noble populace, but the other one is bad. So ours is good, theirs is bad. And this is really key, because the out-group bias is this psychological tendency to have a dislike to the people in other groups, which is why we've got to bridge this divide. And the way that we can do this is find something that we have common ground on. So the amount of conversations I've had with people, the first thing I'll say to them is, you're here because you care about your friends and your family, your community, that's why I'm here. I have the same, we are the same, we want the same. They will then change in that moment, because they're no longer orientated into this fake caricature of what they think an anti-vaxxer or a conspiracy theorist is. Just putting people together is not usually an effective strategy. So if you get two people opposing views, you put in a room, that generally doesn't work. In fact, a lot of the time it makes matters worse. So then, the three conditions to overcome divide is that you need to give them, when they're talking about things, an equal status. People cannot feel in the situation where they're communicating that they're somehow less than the other person. The second thing, and the most important, is to work something together. So if you can have a talk and you can work towards a common goal, they break down this divide. And the third thing is, if you can have someone in authority or someone who's independent to assess things, it can really be very, very powerful. And it's really to connect to humanity. So when we can actually connect to people, to one-on-one, to the humanity in them, a lot of their prejudice from these groups will start to break away. And when we've discovered really what makes a conversation successful, we've noticed if you can't overcome this one, you generally are going to have almost no success getting through to someone with any fact, any piece of information, or anything. We've really got to get them to see that we're not those caricatures in their mind. Thank you.
Thank you, David. David is a co-chair of our Mind Health Committee at the Royal Council for Health, and I'm really honored to have him as a participant and to co-chair with me, and bringing forward brilliant information. Thank you. And I'd like him to announce, he's got an amazing, I'm going to let him tell you.
So if anyone's interested in more to find out how to talk to friends, family, people that hold different views, we have a reachingpeople.net website, there's a YouTube channel, and then on the 24th of September, we're literally going to show all the strategies that are used against us, and then we can how we bridge the divide. So it's a full day there. So we're really going to try and help the campaigns how to get through a message effectively.
And Melanie and Rob, if you'd like to bring up your pamphlets, and you can put them on the stage here if you have them. And so at the end of our session, if you'd like to come up and get the pamphlet, just to, she's got a flyer about the event. Now we have another brilliant speaker to join us, Dr. Christian Buckland. I'm sorry. That was a pregnant pause, just because he is a wonderful speaker, and I'd really like you to tell him about all of your talents. And he also is a member of our Mind Health Committee and very valuable to us. And I'm so happy he's joined us today and agreed to speak today, because he's got a lot of wisdom to share with you. So please, I'd like you to tell him about yourself. Don't be shy. Go ahead.
Thank you, everyone. My name's Dr. Christian Buckland. I'm a psychotherapist from the UK, and I've been working with the vaccine injured for a long time, and I'm really privileged and honoured to be here talking to you all about a couple of different topics that are really, really important to my heart. But before I start, I want to put a caveat in, and that is, at any time, if you sense that I'm a little bit angry, I'm not. Please forgive me. I'm actually just really heartbroken and disturbed about how we've all been so badly damaged over the past couple of years. It's been a really, really difficult couple of years. So I'm really pleased to be talking about two different topics that are really close to my heart: censorship and behavioural science, and how that's impacted my friends who have been injured by the COVID vaccine. So I know everyone knows what censorship is, so I'm not going to go over it all, but I did just want to highlight a couple of really important points, because I do think they help understand what's going on. I want to acknowledge that censorship is not an easy topic. It is complicated. Deciding what is or what isn't allowed to be said is not an easy thing. And to highlight that, I've got a little graph here. And it's from a poll where people were asked, how should social media companies handle each of the following type of content? And as you can see, right at the top, it's a clear consensus. We do not allow that topic. It should not be allowed. But when you go down the list, you see it's not so clear cut. If you censor some of those topics, you're going to upset a lot of people. And if you don't censor those topics, you're going to upset a lot of people. So it's not a straightforward conversation. But I do just want to say, in my opinion, there are certain topics that should never, ever be censored. And one of them is people discussing their own lived experiences of trauma. It's really, really wrong. It's also really important to understand that censorship is connected to the overall psychology of authority. Censorship happens when our cultural values and our beliefs are threatened in times of crisis, Or a crisis is used to increase censorship. And the problem is, once that crisis goes down, you don't see the censorship going down. It stays where it is. And that really causes a huge divide in the population. Something else I want to stress, censorship doesn't mean that the information is wrong or someone is lying, because censorship changes over time. And one example of that is just last month we saw YouTube's COVID-19 misinformation policy change. And now you are allowed to say vaccines do not reduce the risk of contracting COVID-19. Whereas last year, or just three months ago, you'd get your YouTube channel taken down and you'd get banned if you said that. And what that helps us to understand is that censorship is a behavioral science tool. Because if you suppress information, you control response. And if you control people's responses, you control their behavior and you change their behavior. And that's what behavioral science is all about, getting people to change their behaviors without them knowing. And an example of that has been how we've seen the use of fear being used to change people's behavior over the last 2.5 years. We saw the artificially inflated risk factors of COVID and the censorship of protective factors such as natural immunity or the importance of a healthy immune system. They were both censored. And what that did was change the population's behavior towards lots of different topics, such as mask wearing, lockdown, social distancing, and whether it was right or wrong for them to take a COVID vaccine. Because what I believe's happened is that censorship and behavioral science has been used on a public who didn't consent and didn't know it was being used on them. That way? Ooh! I wish I knew that. And what that has done has meant that it's impacted on people's ability to conduct a risk assessment for themselves to say whether or not they should be taking a vaccine. So I think it's been really important to say that censorship and behavioral science has meant that people could not give informed consent whether it was right or wrong for them to take a vaccine. So moving on to how censorship's impacted those who have been injured by the vaccine, I've spent a lot of time over the last year talking to lots of people who have been injured, and one of the clear messages that was given to me was that people's lived experiences are being denied. People talk to me about going to medical appointments, and the appointment's going really well, they're talking about their symptoms, and all of a sudden they say, I think it might be connected to the vaccine I took only a couple of weeks ago. And they tell me this glazed look comes over many doctors' eyes, and all of a sudden the appointment comes to an abrupt end. We've seen many people's symptoms being blamed on mental health conditions, and that to me is really, really worrying, because just because we can't identify what's going on a physical level does not mean it is psychological. Sometimes it is, and I work with that a lot in my day job, but that does not mean everything is mental health related. We know that the legacy media are refusing to report on it, and I'm sure they're being told they're not to report on it either. So even people who are injured are not getting their message out into the mainstream media. And we know that if people are posting their stories online saying this happened to me, they're getting censored, they're getting silenced, they're getting taken down, and many people are getting banned off the internet, or certain social media platforms anyway. And that to me is so dehumanizing, because you've got lots of people saying, this is me, this is my story, this is what happened to me, and this is how I feel. And then all of a sudden, they're taken off, they're censored. It is so wrong, and it's so dehumanizing. And because those lived experiences are being denied, what we see is most people are finding their only form of connection with others is through the online support groups that are being set up. And they're popping up all over the world. And it's offering them a connection with other people who understand what's going on for them, and they don't feel they're being fobbed off. The problem is, many of these groups are constantly under threat of being taken down. And we just saw yesterday, the BBC informed Facebook that there were groups using a carrot emoji to avoid censorship, and so Facebook wants to take action. So these groups that are set up to try and help people are always being under threat of being removed. And something I'm a little bit known to go on and on about is that if you censor anyone who has suffered any form of medical trauma, you're going to greatly elevate the chance of that trauma turning into post-traumatic stress disorder. And PTSD is a significantly debilitating and severe mental health condition that greatly elevates people's risk factors of suicide. So censoring the vaccine is really, really dangerous. And something else that I want to highlight is that the censorship that has been used has meant that many medical professionals are simply unaware of vaccine injury symptoms, so are not able to ask those probing questions to get an accurate diagnosis about what's going on for people. And we all know if someone gets a wrong diagnosis, we miss an opportunity for early intervention. And early intervention is so important to a safe recovery. And that means we're going to suffer from avoidable deaths because people have been misdiagnosed. And I just want to concentrate on that last point because I'm going to give it a bit of a case study to highlight that. So right here we've got a 49-year-old healthy man, self-employed, so probably doesn't want to be out of work. Exercise 5 days a week, so he's physically fit. No previous medical condition, so he's going to be pretty good. He had an injection in March of 2021, and within 3 weeks he had a blood clot. Referred to hospital and had his treatment, and when he's in hospital, the doctor writes on his discharge letters that it doesn't need reporting to the yellow card reporting system, as it's over 3 weeks since he's had his injection. Sorry, it's over 4 weeks since he's had his injection, which means we've already seen a missed opportunity to report that these injections were causing blood clots. His symptoms got worse over the next couple of months. He went to his GP with stroke-like symptoms, had problems talking, constant ringing in his ears, joint and muscle pain. He lost 5 stone in weight. And as an eating disorder clinician, I know that if someone loses a lot of weight, that's a red flag. There's something wrong. He had tachycardia and high blood pressure, and he got a diagnosis of anxiety. And he struggled for the rest of the year, and he told me he just thought he was going mad. It's obviously in my head, I've just got to pull myself together. He went back to the GP in December, same symptoms, but he got prescribed antidepressants because now he's pretty down because he's really, really injured. In June of this year, he had chest pain and a pulsing neck and was told to go to A&E, who diagnosed AF and recommended to see his GP, who increased his antidepressant. And it was only in July, which was only a couple of days after last seeing his GP, people in his support group that I've just been talking about that keep getting shut down said to him they were so concerned over his pulsing neck and his chest pain that they recommended he sees a private cardiologist as soon as possible. So he did, and he got a diagnosis of right-sided heart failure. So what I'm trying to highlight here isn't that those doctors are deliberately doing something wrong. The censorship means they are unable to do their job properly. They're missing out on important probing questions and considering whether the possibility of people's symptoms could be related to a vaccine. And when I was writing this up, I wanted to make sure I got it right, and I had a chat with him because I wanted to get the information correct. And he said to me that when he was discharged from hospital, he wrote his story up because he wanted to help people who might be suffering with the wrong diagnosis and make sure they got the right help. And he posted it online along with a letter from his one of the doctors confirming it was related to the vaccine, and it was taken down. And because I'm a very boring psychotherapist, I asked him, how does that make you feel? And he started talking, and I said, Paul, do you mind if I just record that? Because it'll be really powerful to share, because it's very well me saying to you, this is what's going on for people. It's so important to hear it from them. So I've just got a short clip, if that's okay. It's just 2 minutes long. Oh, have we got any volume?
Be so careful what you put on. I got restricted and it was very upsetting. I'm just trying to help people. I'm putting on there what I think, not just my opinion, doctor's opinion of how to help some of these adverse reactions I had, which I thought might be helpful for somebody out there, or at least my story would be helpful for somebody out there knowing they're not going to be alone. But I felt that I'm just so glad I haven't been. Because you get taken off, you lose your support group, you lose all that help around you. Because a few people are stuck in their own home, they can't leave their own home at the moment because they're so ill. So sometimes I can't leave. leave the house. If I got aches and pains, I can't go out. So some people are stuck in a house alone on their own. If they get taken off from that support group, they're in that four walls on their own. They haven't got the usual people they talk to and ask for help, advice. It's heartbreaking. And God forbid, last year, I think, when I was talking to people, if I kind of lost that little group, a little hope of somebody else is going through this, and the advice and support they gave me, if I'd lost that, whether it's for a couple of days, because when you're in that little bubble and you can't do anything, you've got no help, you're so ill, you can't literally leave the house, you can't be bothered to ring people, talk to people, you just want to talk to that group who knows exactly what you're going through. If you lose that, somebody could take their own life, you know, and it's wrong. If they want to censor something, at least contact that person, message that person and say why they put it on there, on certain things, especially if they're saying they're seriously ill. You know, on my group, I put everything what I've been through the last 17 months. And I think if somebody read that and banned me, that is so wrong. And that could push somebody over the edge. So wrong.
It really is so wrong, because these people are talking about their experiences, and you know, I find sometimes talking to people who have been injured, I find it very hard, and I listen to a lot of different stories and difficult stories all the time, but I find it very distressing listening to people's stories of people who have been harmed, because they're finding it very hard to get the right help. So in summary, all I'm trying to say is censoring the vaccine injured causes unnecessary and additional physical suffering. We're missing out on important diagnosis, early intervention is being missed, and we're increasing the risk of death. And also, we're causing additional unnecessary psychological suffering, and people's mental health is declining due to the fact that their lived experiences are being denied. And that's going to increase the risk of suicide. So finally, I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who shared their story with me to help me be able to talk about what's going on for them. And I also want to say a massive thank you to all the support groups out there throughout the world. They really are so many people's lifelines. And thank you very much for listening to me today.
Thanks so much, Dr. Buckland. We really appreciate you sharing this. There's so much power in a story. And for all of you who have stories, families, friends, or even when you are communicating with people in social media and you're part of these support groups, share those stories, because that's one of the doors that we open in communication. Step into their shoes like you stepped into this man's shoes. You can't tell me you didn't feel chills down your body and tears coming to your eyes watching that. Share those stories and open those doors of communication. And remember, everybody feels righteous in what they know or what they think they know. But bring down your guard, put your ego aside, and step into their shoes and start your storytelling right there. Thank you. And we have a very well-known British activist and broadcaster with us today, and I'm so proud to have you here on the stage to talk with us and talk with everybody here. We have Maajid Nawaz, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jennifer. I want to begin by apologizing because I was calling Heather, so I do apologize in public for that. I have form because yesterday I was calling Christian Richard, and I apologize to you as well. But it's in reference to Christian's question to me earlier that I would like to begin my speech, because he asked me a question when we were speaking over lunch. How does somebody like you end up discussing COVID mandates in a conference full of scientists and medical professionals? And the implication in his question, quite a legitimate implication, may I add, is I've never studied science beyond my GCSEs, which we do in the UK at the age of 16, which is true. I don't have any science qualifications. I have no scientific, psychological, biological, or any other form of ology to my name. So what brings me to this conversation, in answer to the question that Christian posed to me earlier, is why I'd like to speak to you. And the reason is I believe that we are all involved, whether we like it or not, and I'm sorry to put it this way, I will try and give you some hope, but at the moment it's important for you to hear. I believe we are all involved involuntarily in a war against our very souls. And this war is being conducted globally. And those on the other side of this war have far more power in the material sense, and that's what they think power is, even though it's not. And they are using that power to attempt to destroy everything that it means to be human. Now, this war has been named by those people engaging in this war. So if you go back to post-World War II, when I think the world realized that dropping bombs and nuclear bombs on each other may not necessarily be the best way forward, what we began witnessing instead was a series of wars that were called wars, but were conducted by our own governments against what they presented to us were ills in our own society. And if you think back to the war on drugs that Nancy Reagan announced on behalf of her husband, the President Reagan, the war on drugs was initially a war that was ostensibly to stamp out crime in our societies. And so we were all encouraged by government policy to rally around them in this war on drugs, and certain measures needed to be taken, including the dehumanization of a certain demographic that ended up disproportionately in our prison systems. And we can look to the United States of America to see the results of that disastrous war on drugs, but it also impacted the South Americas, which was in fact the battleground for this war on drugs. But the aim that was being told to us, that this is a war on drugs to stamp out crime, was not the real aim of the war on drugs. Instead, the real aim of the war on drugs was to increase state power, was to increase authoritarianism, was to increase the ability of the state to interfere even in foreign countries in the name of a domestic war. But it began, as all things that begin as psychological abuse began, it began incrementally. And the incremental beginning was a war on crime. But notice what happened next. And this is what, in answer to Christian's question to me, what brings me here, it's what involved me against my will. Because after the war on drugs came the war on terror. And like the war on drugs, the war on terror was used not to stamp out terror. Because as you'll notice, just like the war on drugs, the people that conducted this war, the people in fact that began this war, were the ones that started it. And then they wanted us on board to help them finish something they started. What they were telling us they wanted us to finish was terrorism, while they invaded many countries around the world. And I noticed a drone that was flying over here earlier, probably to film everybody, which is a good thing. But it's important to understand that those drones, how I read them, is they drop bombs on people. And that's what they were doing in Afghanistan, that's what they were doing in Iraq. We were told it was to stop terrorism. In hindsight, we now realize it was based on lies, such as the lie that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Such as the lie that bin Laden was in Afghanistan when he was caught in Pakistan. And Pakistan was among the closest allies, my country of origin, among the closest allies to the United States of America in that war on terror. So it went from a war on crime and the war on drugs to a war, what we were told, was to protect our way of life. So first, it's to stop crime, protect our societies, keep them safe. Then, the war on terror is to keep our way of life safe. So you've gone incrementally one step further. Now it's about protecting our way of life in the war on terror. Then comes the war on COVID. Now the war on COVID is a step even further than the war on terror, because it's no longer about protecting our way of life, it's about protecting our very life itself. Our physical lives, our health. So you can see how the temperature is ratcheted up in the war on COVID. Now all of us are involved because we're seeking to stay alive. Not just to protect our way of life, because of course those nasty terrorists wanted to destroy freedom and democracy. Not just to protect our way of life, but to protect our very life itself. So it's more visceral, which allows government once again to incrementally increase the temperature, further the authoritarian measures needed to keep you alive. That's the reason being given to you. Of course, you saw the emergency legislation that was brought in Canada, for example, that allowed Justin Trudeau to freeze bank accounts. Of course, there's a famous or infamous, depending on your perspective, kickboxing world champion called Andrew Tate, who's just had his individual personal bank account frozen for giving a series of podcasts. Now, that happened just this month. It didn't begin with Trudeau freezing the accounts of the truckers' protests in Canada. I can assure you that, as I'm standing witness here right in front of you, that Muslim bank accounts were being frozen long before that in the war on terror, including my own in the United States of America, HSBC. Froze my bank accounts. I couldn't operate in the name of the war on terror. So you go from a war against crime to protect our safety, to a war to protect our way of life, to a war to protect our very life itself. Now everyone's involved. There's one step that's already been taken to take it even more viscerally beyond protecting our lives. Now you may be thinking, what's more urgent than that? Well, the answer is the war on climate change. Because now we're no longer protecting our own individual lives, but all life on the planet is at risk, is going to be obliterated. We're going to die in 50 years. What, 2030, how many years is that, right? Not even 50. We're going to die in 2030 unless we reduce carbon output to 0. And that means all life on the planet is now at risk. So this war is no longer about protecting our own individual lives, but even animal lives, human lives, heck, the trees, everything's going to die. And in the name of the war on climate, with this net zero carbon policy, you can see how, again, that can be used as an excuse for more authoritarianism. So people have to install smart meters, and those smart meters will tell the government how much power you're using and exactly how you're using it. And of course, we have to switch to electric cars. We have to switch to everything electric, which can be switched off. If you think it was easy for Trudeau in the Netherlands, for example, against the truckers, the farmers' protests there, against Muslims in the war on terror, against Andrew Tate, a kickboxer who gave a few podcasts to have his bank account turned off, if you think that was easy, just see how easy it will become in the war on climate change, under the name of the fact that you have emitted too much carbon, to switch off your power. Of course, your currency will not be physical. You will not be dealing in cash, but in central banking digital currencies, which has already been announced by the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, otherwise known as the Finance Minister, the third most important post in our government, as leader of the G7. In other words, as the leader of the most powerful countries in the world. Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor, already announced that we will do away with cash and start trading in central banking digital currencies. That means digital coupons. So if you are deemed to have used too much carbon, if you are not environmentally friendly enough, then not only can your electricity be switched off, but the currency, the very currency you use, will no longer work. When you try and buy a steak, you will be told that actually this steak, this is meat, red meat you're eating, but you had a hamburger for lunch. So you've met your quota today. That's otherwise known as the Chinese social credit system. So as you can see, and I'm very happy to be on a panel with behavioral psychologists, because what I'm describing is, over the course of decades, an incremental policy which nudges the human population on the entire planet towards demanding more and more protection from these demons that are being presented in front of us in the name of wars. And the end result is that we have been, over the course of these decades, incrementally moving towards more and more centralized state control and authoritarianism. Why I'm telling you all this is because it's my job here today to ask you all to take a metaphoric mobile phone. I say metaphoric because I hope you put your physical phones down, but take a metaphoric mobile phone and just pinch the screen and zoom out a bit and understand that the great work all of you are doing here, and it's fantastic work, is but one act of a larger theatre. And it's that theatre I'm trying to describe so you can understand two things. Understand the context in which you operate, which should give you motivation and encouragement because you are not alone. The context in which you operate, there are the climate scientist equivalent of you attempting to debunk this net zero hoax. There are the political operatives, the equivalent to you in the war on terror, working very hard and have been for a long time, attempting to convince our own governments to pull out of the countries they've invaded. And we can see some of the results of that because we're no longer in Afghanistan. There are the equivalents of you in the war of drugs, in the war on drugs, trying to convince governments that this policy is insane and it's leading to the disproportionate imprisonment of young black men. And that's the only thing it's achieving. It's not reducing drugs consumption. But the power that the state has accrued through the war on drugs, as it did through the war on terror with the Patriot Act, as it did with the war on COVID through the emergency legislation, and as it has already agreed to do in the climate war through the COP26 summit, and all of the states' agreements to reduce our carbon emissions to zero by 2030, you can see they are gaining more and more power. And if once we understand that theatre, we understand the Plato's cave image that was on there before, we need to understand what's happening on a wider level to understand the role we play in making sure that we don't fall for this psychological abuse. And that's exactly what it is. Now, that's what I wanted to present, but why me? Why am I here speaking to you about this? Because as I said, it was the war on terror that involuntarily dragged me into this situation. So, by the age of 24, I was imprisoned in Egypt for attempting to overthrow the Egyptian government. Now, all you need to know about that episode in my life is I was adopted by Amnesty International as a prisoner of conscience. There's no violence even alleged in what we were jailed for. That's how I was involuntarily dragged into this conversation. And how I answered Christian earlier was, what I noticed without needing scientific degrees, and by the way, thankfully I'm not completely uneducated, it's just I didn't study science. Without needing scientific degrees, the minute I saw the state telling me that if I don't take an injection that they insist I must take, that I will suffer societal repercussions, including losing my job, that's all I needed to know, that war has been declared against the human soul. I didn't need to know nor even prove. I didn't even need to know or even prove that the vaccine was going to harm anybody, which clearly by now we can see that it has. I didn't need to prove that. I didn't need a science degree to even talk about that. What I needed to do was say the following, that while being dragged through a torture dungeon in Egypt, where they tortured everybody by electrocution on their teeth and genitalia, they then took us in solitary, after 3.5 months of solitary confinement, they then took us to a doctor and said, take this injection. We did not have a choice. My cellmate, his name was Hisham, I will forever remember him, dropped dead in the cell next door to me. There was a riot that night in this Egyptian prison, and the reason is because we believed that they had killed him by injecting something into his body. The reason we were told that he died was he apparently had died of hepatitis B. So all I needed to know when the state said to me that if you don't take this jab, we will sack you, was that war had been declared against the human soul. Of course, everything else that's transpired is all great work all of you are doing here. But the minute you realize that that's all you need to know, if I came to any one of you, male or female, let's not make this about gender, and said, strip your clothes off because I say so, otherwise I'm going to sack you from your job, you don't need to know why. That's a violation of your rights. So the minute the state said that if I don't take an injection, I will suffer repercussions, as I said, it alerted me to the fact that this had been done before in the war on terror, and it had been done before in the war on drugs. And that's why it was easy for me to enter this conversation from a perspective of political theory, from a perspective of civil liberties, from a perspective that we must make sure that the human soul is protected. And so in conclusion, just checking the time here, I have 10 seconds. In conclusion, what I'd like to say is if we recognize that this is what is at stake, there is hope, and the hope is the following. Look at the state of the war on drugs. Very few people believe in it anymore. And there's a reason for that, and that's because your equivalents on the drug reform side have been doing the very equivalent work that you are all doing against that. Likewise in the war on terror, there's a reason why very few people like Tony Blair and George Bush anymore. I've sat personally with both of them in that war on terror in an attempt to convince them of these views, one-on-one, face-to-face. But there's a reason why the narrative has been lost in the war on drugs and in the war on terror. There's a reason that the narrative on the war on COVID is no longer what it used to be even a year ago. And the fact that we can all gather here today and come to Austria without having to prove our vaccine status, there's a reason for that. And that is that the people who gathered together to fight this have had some success. And that's why I'm asking you to carry on, because you are one act in this theatre, and it is having an impact, and your equivalents are doing the same on the climate policy agenda as well. Now, to what ends? What is the purpose? And this is where we must always remember that we've got to work backwards from recognizing that this is a war, because what the globalist political project is the following. They want us all, with all our differences, with all our cultures and religions and faith and no faith and nationalities and ethnicities, the globalist political project wants us to be one. To be one thing, yeah? The globalist political project wants us to be one all over the planet. What I'd ask you is to remember that the spiritual project is not for us all to be one, but for the oneness of being. And when we understand that, we understand that therein lies the solution to what we need to do. There will be attempts to divide us, to conquer us in this war. Those attempts will even occur among us here. So-and-so is controlled opposition. So-and-so thinks there's no virus. That person thinks there is a virus. Let's fight them on this point. Yeah? But actually, that's exactly what they want. And there's going to be anger. A lot of us are going to be angry because people have died en masse. This is probably the worst mass death that has occurred since World War II. People will be angry. But just like in the terrorism debate, and this is what we've been doing for over a decade, please remember that the Muslim community's worst enemy were those terrorists that were killing children in the name of that war. We must remain peaceful, because everything they want to do is for us to turn angry and violent so that they can say, see, this is why these people need to be controlled. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maajid. That was a very powerful presentation. Really powerful. He spoke to all of our hearts. And stand in your strength, because he's right. You are a sovereign being, and you all have so much more power than you realize. And this is a war of fear. And we think that the people who have gone and vaccinated are in fear, and those that are here that are vaccinated and hesitant or whatever they may be, but those of us even in the movement are in fear, and you have to realize to calm that fear and realize there's a lot of theater involved in this, and there's a lot more of us that can stand up and represent humanity and lead a good way, or lead our way forward to a better world. And I understand we have Michael Alexander. We have Dr. Rob Malone on Zoom waiting to come on now. So we're going to go ahead and hear from Dr. Malone, and then Michael Alexander, who is a constitutional lawyer in Canada. He happens to be my lawyer, and he will talk about what's going on there and opinionate with that too. So please go ahead with Dr. Malone. Thank you.
For the opportunity to speak to you. I'll keep my comments brief and hope that it'll help you to get back on track with your timing and schedule. I want to follow the fantastic presentation we just had. The metaphor that's been rolled out over the last two, I believe, is that we're in a war, and I completely endorse that perspective. Let's talk about the big picture of the nature of that war. What we have is a group of individuals, largely unelected, that have been literally working for decades to promote a what they apparently believe is the only viable solution to what is essentially overpopulation. That's the core thesis here. And what that is embodied in is a set of policies and strategies that have been developed and deployed that are grounded in the idea that a centralized global command economy based solution is the only way to address the problems associated with overpopulation of humans on the planet. That's the core thesis, is that there must be a centralized governance organization globally because the problems that we're encountering are so large that they can only be resolved through a global governance solution. And all of this stuff that we're encountering is really just a skirmish, an embodiment. We're using the metaphor of war, but what we've encountered over the last 2.5 years, and is just nicely laid out, it goes back in a incrementalist strategy, back not just a decade or two, but really it goes back to the time of World War II and even back into the 30s. What I want to share with you, in addition to my core message of encouraging all to remember these 3 basic words, integrity, dignity, and community, is to speak a little bit about the lessons I've learned in dealing with the control of information and the manipulation of information, which we've all experienced over the last 2.5 years, pushing 3 years now. This is, in my opinion, an unrestricted information warfare. Information is the battleground. And what we've experienced with this process and pattern of censorship, information control, deplatforming, ghosting, gaslighting, eliminating, as we heard in 2 talks ago, the pressure and deplatforming of voices, just expressing what they've experienced. This is all information warfare. And we're in a situation in which the major information channels, as you all know, are controlled by large corporate interests, which all are harmonized around both protecting their own privilege. I think this is important to understand. The Trusted News Initiative, for example, is not just about preventing Russian propaganda, infiltration, and influence in elections, which is what it was originally purported to be. The Trusted News Initiative, managed by the British Broadcasting Corporation. But what it is really a trade organization seeking to protect the privilege of large media, corporate media, in a time in which the business model of corporate media, centralized information and centralized information control, is increasingly failing. And the streaming podcast broadcast format that you're using right now is an example of that increasing failure of the large centralized media to control all information, and by extension to control thought. We can only think about the things that we have had an encounter with, the information that we're fed. This is why there is this hypnosis in so many people that Matthias speaks about, and Matthias Desmet and many others. This, he was referred to in 2 talks ago as the haze that comes across the eyes of the physicians that encounter the patient who clearly has a vaccine-induced injury. What I want to message to you about this is that this is unrestricted information warfare. And I encounter all the time people that are still taken aback because they're encountering the unfairness of what is occurring. And I've heard that, for instance, in some of the talks that I've been listening to here. We're all shocked by how unfair this is. We're all shocked by the ethics of what's going on. We're shocked by the dehumanization. We all say this isn't fair, this isn't right. They're not following the rules. I want to say something that's really kind of harsh. They don't care. There are no rules. This is unrestricted information warfare. They will do whatever they need. We are the opponents. They feel justified, the ends justify the means, to do whatever they need to do to achieve what I think they sincerely believe is their noble cause, preventing the destruction of the world. They seem to believe that they need to have these weapons of information control, thought control, nudging, all of this social psychology that's been deployed on us. They seem to believe that it's necessary to do that because we are not capable of managing ourselves. We have to be managed. That's the thesis. And this belief system that the world is fair, that these people should be behaving according to some fair rules of engagement, is just obsolete and naive. You have to get away from that. You have to move beyond the shock of what is being done to us. You have to move beyond the belief that there is anything approaching something like fair or acceptable rules of engagement or acceptable bioethics. What we've seen over the last 2.5 years is that the whole construct of bioethics that's been built after World War II and the Nuremberg Accords has been thrown right out the window, and they don't care. They control all the information, and they can basically form reality however they want by controlling that information. I believe that there is a way forward. It's not going to be easy. And I'm pretty much in the same camp as Matthias Desmet. We're in this so deep that there's not going to be a quick, easy resolution. It may be to some extent that, as happened after World War II and the Nazis in Germany, something that us Austrians are very familiar with, people walk away and they just kind of compartmentalize it in their brain, and they just don't think about what happened and what they did over the last few years. And I think that's probably going to happen with much of the medical care provider environment. But it's the medical part of this is just a skirmish. There is clearly a strong belief system, as was just discussed, that unless they employ these artificial strategies, this incrementalism, to implement a global control system, the growth in population and the demands on the environment and all resources are such that there's going to be catastrophic failure at some point. And they speak about Agenda 2030 as that endpoint, as a key pivot point. But our opponents truly believe, I think, that they are justified. The means justify, the ends justify the means. They're justified to use all of these weapons against us because we're not able to control things ourselves. I suggest that they are probably going to be partially successful. What we have seen over the last 2.5 years, fortunately, is we've been able to see their hand, and we've been able to see how incompetent they are. We've been able to see, once again, that a centralized command economy solution fails repeatedly because it does not account for unexpected events. It does not account well for the diversity of environment, people, structures, economies, etc. Globally centralized command economy-based solutions to solve the problems of overpopulation and the impact of human beings on the globe are going to fail. Unfortunately, they're going to fail catastrophically, because that's what always happens. I believe the way forward is not to duplicate other and create other centralized solutions. I believe the way forward is decentralization. And I think many people are starting to concur with that. I suggest for your consideration that in the face of this long-standing belief that the nation state is obsolete, we should take a second look at that. I think nation states as structures have served us very well over time. And I suggest that the battlefront that we can potentially win on is to try to overcome the momentum of the European Union and the United Nations and the World Health Organization, as the Better Way is trying to do, and to fall back on the structures that have proven to work, which is the nation state. And even within the nation state, to seek more decentralized, locally based solutions. And in the meantime, for those of us, the 10% that want to be free, remember, most people don't value freedom. Most people want to follow a leader. Most people want to be told what to do. It's only about 10% of the population that truly wants to accept the burden of being free. For those of us, and I think many of you fall into that 10% that seek freedom, that believe in the rights of the individual, I fear that what we're going to have to do between now and whenever we are able to find an accommodation with this globalist thrust is we're going to have to seek to recreate community, which Dr. Desmond teaches in the history of Hannah Arendt and Gustave Le Bon, etc. I heard somebody mention Plato's cave, this ancient awareness of how populations get hypnotized. For those of us that are outside of this hypnosis, we have to form communities. And the Better Way Conference is a great example of forming communities, and we have to further strengthen those. And we have to be aware of the threats to our ability to form community. One of those key threats is the control of information, and in the modern age, the control of the web. I think that's where our battle is how can we push forward towards decentralization rather than centralization, falling back on the more traditional structures of nation states, which preserve ethnic and cultural diversity and allow for more appropriate local solutions. And beyond that, focus on how do we rebuild the community that has been so fractured all over the world, particularly the Western world, by technology, media, political forces, etc. And come back to a focus on these core human principles, integrity, dignity, and community, and try to envision a different postmodernist future, not a future driven by transhumanism and the fusion of man and machine, but a future focused on celebrating our humanity. What is it that makes us human? Valuing the human fundamentals of family and children. And I'm sorry, to a significant extent, whatever your faith is, the ethics and belief systems that give our lives meaning and purpose. I believe that's where we need to go. But between here and there, please do not be naive. We are in, I completely concur, a battlefield that involves total unrestricted media and information warfare. There is nothing here that is fair. Don't expect fairness. There's nothing here that's grounded in what we believe to be core ethical principles. Our opponents are fundamentally utilitarian and believe in centralized control and command economy solutions. They believe in the greatest good for the greatest number, bless their hearts, and they think that if they just have enough information and algorithmic control of that information, they can optimize a solution for all of us and impose it on us. So that's my brief message to you. In listening to the preceding, there's certainly been plenty of discussion of the nature of the vaccines, the adverse events, the suppression of early treatment, the crime after crime after crime that's been performed in terms of human ethics. But I think that there is a way forward for all of us, and I'm trying to arm you so that you can be effective warriors and as we move forward. And the first thing you must get over is the sense of outrage about how we're being treated and the manipulations that are being performed. It is not fair, it is not right, it is not proper, and they don't care. So I'm sorry to leave you with that, but I think the bright light forward is building community and remembering these three words: integrity, human dignity, and community. I thank you for your time, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Dr. Malone. He speaks the truth, and we are all the truth. And the one thing that the globalists cannot control is our reality, and the reality we're aware of. So I would like to bring forward, and actually follows very well after Dr. Malone's talk, is Michael Alexander, who's a constitutional lawyer in Canada. And Michael, thank you. Hello. Michael, we're just getting your volume working. No audio, he's on, but no audio. Oh, Michael, you're muted. I can see it on your screen. He's coming up on the stage now. No? Michael, are you there?
I hope so.
Oh, but I can't see you on the screen. Ah, there you are.
Somebody muted me at that end.
Okay, great. We can hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, we're good. Well, these presentations have just been so rich. I don't know where to begin. But let me start with Maajid. And in the spirit of what David said, I want to try to find some common ground here. I really like the notion that a lot of these wars that have been waged in recent years are about government control. I think some of them may have been benign in their purpose to begin with, but once government gets its power, it doesn't give it up. And then the intention settles in that this is the way we're going to do business in the future. And the state continues to expand. I've been part of that battle, and the LAC is part of that battle. I mean, personally, what I'm doing in my practice, and have been doing for a long time, is battling the administrative state. And so, the administrative state, all the regulatory bodies, they extend their tentacles over society. We are all regulated in so many different ways. But what has happened is that the courts and government itself have allowed these administrative bodies to usurp governmental authority and to act beyond their legislative mandates. And this is part of the reason that we're in the situation that we're in from my standpoint. So in my practice in Canada, I'm battling the colleges of physicians. in every province across the country and even in Illinois. And what they have done in Canada is essentially they have been the leading arm of the medical tyranny. So in Ontario, for instance, the college has said the physicians cannot say anything contrary to the public or government narrative regarding COVID-19. They cannot contradict public health recommendations or policies, or they'll go to discipline, they'll lose their license. They can't write medical exemptions for COVID-19 vaccines, or you'll lose your license. If you prescribe ivermectin, okay, your career is over. And so in Ontario, we have 14 million people. Essentially, the college is acting to govern the health of the entire province. It's governing doctors, patients, the hospital system. And so far, nobody's done anything about it. I'm the only person in the province right now. And in fact, only one of 2 or 3 people in the country who is actually attempting to take down the college, as I think they can be taken down. Because it's very obvious that they have gone beyond their legislative authority. And so I have cases pending right now in the Ontario courts and in the British Columbia courts where I'm challenging the administrative state on constitutional grounds and on basic jurisdictional grounds. And my main concern, which is manifested in the work that we do at LAC, is with natural justice. The idea of natural justice is embodying the idea of natural right, which is reflected in the American Constitution. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All human beings are created equal. They are all endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. The basic idea is that rights are pre-political, that they exist and belong to us as human beings, which means they exist outside the sphere or the scope of government. And in LAC, we're trying to bring that idea to bear in different ways. 3 different ways of looking at the law and at the world. I think that philosophy of natural right is the one savior we have, at least on the level of law, in this battle. It's really interesting that we've been talking about Plato's Cave. I used to teach Plato's Republic at the University of Toronto. And so I wanted to say a little bit about that moving forward. I'd like to address a few things that Robert said. And I like this point that the people we're battling here, many of them are true believers, in the sense that they think the organizing principle of society should be market forces. This is an idea that's been in the universities for a long time. It's taught in business schools. It's the invisible hand view of the world. If everybody just pursues their self-interest and on the level of the economy, that somehow the common good will somehow result. And what this has done in the end is it's subverted liberal democracy. And so liberal democracy has been subverted by economics, you could say, and now particularly by behavioral economics. And you know, the old idea of natural right, natural justice was that the market is subservient to the guarantee of fundamental rights. But the WEF crowd and all the MBAs and executives supporting them believe to the contrary that rights should be subservient to the market. And that the market is justice. And a really strange and paradoxical flip, rather than just leaving it to the market, they now are interested in centralized control in order to institute the solution, which I think is probably the wrinkle that's been put on this whole way of looking at the world by technology and the opportunities for control that big tech has offered these people. You know, as far as decentralized communities go, federalism used to be the idea that we could strike a balance between centralized and decentralized forces with a federal government and local governments, both states or provinces and municipalities. But it's no longer striking that balance. And where the modern state has really failed is in transparency and accountability. And when we get out of this mess, my next project will be proposed legislation for Canada that resolves the problem that the modern state is no longer transparent and accountable in spite of freedom of information legislation. So I agree, we're in a war. And, you know, the reference to Plato, you know, it's, you know, what I find interesting about the whole cave analogy is that, you know, Plato didn't think that there was really an exit from the cave for most people. And he drew quite a stark distinction between the few and the many. So the few could be liberated from the shadows of the cave and they could see the light if they could be reached through dialectical conversation, one might say through pure reason, through pure dialogue, which I'm sure the people on stage today would agree is a bit of a reach. You know, so Plato would just, I mean, what's interesting today is that the few, the enlightened few, are the people who seem to have been most captured by this whole thing, which is something that I think Plato would never have foreseen. So it's the people on the vanguard of science, as it were, who are now most within the cave and most want other people to be in the cave. You know, I've spent a lot of time wondering about why people are captured, why I wasn't captured. I meet people from so many different walks of life. I mean, there's such diversity in people who are captured and those who are not. And I can't really put my finger on it. I mean, in my own case, I'm old enough that I remember the Kennedy assassination. And it became pretty clear, even when I was a kid, that the government did not tell the truth about what happened in Dallas. So I was introduced at a very young age to the idea that government lies, and it lies in a big way. Will even cover up a coup d'etat and the murder of a president in the streets. And then I also, you know, as a young man, followed the MK Ultra hearings in the US. And so the CIA had a program from the 1950s into the 1970s, which was essentially a global program designed at mass mind control. So we've been down this road before. This is really, in my view, MK Ultra 2.0, or maybe it's 3.0. But we've been there before. According to Hayek, this whole thing started with World War II and the expansion of the state that occurred at that time. We were just seeing different iterations of that as we go along. But however that may be, I think the analogy of the cave is very interesting, and I'd really be interested to hear how some of the commentators would address Plato's notion that through reasoning alone you can get out of this mess. I think highly unlikely. So those are my thoughts overall in the presentation so far. They just raise a host of issues. Just in closing, I would like to say one thing about natural law. I think talking about, the idea of fundamental human rights, the idea of natural right to freedom of speech, the right to personal security, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That grows out of a very specific philosophical tradition that started in the 17th century. There may be ideas that are consistent with that in ancient common law, maybe even in Roman law, and maybe in some of the ideas that the Greeks had. But I think that the starting point here is really the idea of natural justice, not so much the idea of natural law, which is more associated with philosophies that put duty before rights. Whereas the innovation of the natural right was to put rights before duties and to derive all duties from rights. So that's just my way of thinking about it. It's the orientation that I take when we're having discussions in the LAC. And I'd like to thank everybody for giving me this opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Michael. And just to let you know, LAC is the Law and Activism Committee and the World Council for Health. And Michael is co-chair with Shabnan Mohammed. Thank you. And in closing, I'd just like your comments from all of you. It's quite interesting, everybody's talks, and certainly Rob Malone. And do you really think that our globalists and everybody that's pushing this agenda forward is innocent to this? I think some of our government representatives are following by whatever is put in front of them to communicate, and I think there are some innocence there, but I do think that there's a deeper sense, and I have to say I wasn't aware of evil in the world. I always pushed it aside, but I realize now, and as Rob Malone said, there are people out there that just don't care and they have an agenda. However, I'd like you all to give a positive spin on all of this, because otherwise we wouldn't be here together in all our power, and I'd like you all to make a comment about this. Okay, I'll come right over here. We'll start where we started in the beginning of our forum.
I'd just like to say that I'm so glad that it's now, because I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, and I'm so glad that this is happening to us. I'm terribly sorry. The truth sticks, and I think the words, this conference, and the World Council for Health, there is a better way, and I'm pleased that I'm on the right side of history.
I really echo that thought. I think we have a window of opportunity now that I don't think has been present for probably 6,000 years. We have a large number of people now know what's going on. And every time that we can show people what's going on, you tell them it doesn't work, but if we can show them in a very effective way, it's a one-way street. People are going to be waking up more and more and more, and it's inevitable these things will collapse, in my opinion. We've just got to keep going.
Something I talk a lot about is how the world has become so divided, and we need to overcome that divide, not have labels of other people and the other side, and we don't need to wake people up and whatever. We just need to realize we're all one, and be compassionate to every single human being and every animal and every part of nature. And just following Matt, I want to say that vulnerability is one of the most important and most courageous characteristics we can all have, because being vulnerable allows a connection with other people, because we are all vulnerable at times. We're all frightened here. Some people are going to be frightened of a virus that's going to kill them. Some people are going to be frightened that they're going to kill their relatives, and some people are going to be frightened that we're heading down a totalitarian pathway that is going to enslave us all. We're all frightened of something. We just need to recognize we're all human and come together.
Just to re-emphasize that, often you see on T-shirts the phrase "choose love." That actually has a deeper meaning than most people would appreciate with it just being on a T-shirt. And I hope to talk through that Plato's Cave example to demonstrate what it means to choose love. 10% of us, as Robert Malone said, may understand something, which leaves 90% who don't. Now that 90% are going to be led by the 10%. The real war is happening among that 10%. So talk through the example of Plato's Cave. Choosing love, if we're among that 10%, would mean turning around, seeing that there's a dude behind us with a torch, casting shadows on the cave. Now, if you don't choose love, you get enraged at that person for deceiving you all your life, attack them, murder them, take the torch yourself and sit there. Choosing love would mean turning them around, walking them out the cave, and showing them that in front of the sun, that little torch has no power whatsoever. And that's what I think all of us would do.
That was well said. Thank you, gentlemen. And I'd like to remind all of you, and I think you all know, think and speak from your heart. And in doing that, you will be able to help the majority of the world's population move along with us, because know that the majority of the world population is uncertain right now. There's always going to be a small percentage that are certain, but the majority of people are uncertain. So take your story to them, lead with your heart, and step into their shoes. And I know we will win. Now, before we close, Michael, I'd like your final words too, please.
They may be a little out there, but in the midst of all of this, and I suppose my until recently abiding faith and reason, it's been challenged by everything that's happened, and I find myself constantly rethinking what we mean by the mind and where we actually think. My first book that I wrote was called How to Inherit Money. And it was really ultimately about, though it was about inheritance dilemmas, it was ultimately about the relationship between understanding and intuition. And how when I make good decisions and when clients of mine make good decisions, their intuition or their gut feeling is lined up with what they're thinking. And so my motto becomes, think what you feel and feel what you think. We make good decisions. And so what does that say about the mind? Somehow the mind is located all in the body. I don't know exactly what that means, but I was opposed that it plays into what's being said here today, which is that the appeal cannot be strictly rational and that people somehow think with their entire beings, including the physical being. So that's just my closing thought on that. That's an idea I play around with, and maybe we can discuss sometime. It might help.
Thank you very much, Michael. And we know we'll stand in our sovereign beings, and we come together with the World Council for Health, where there are no borders. And we learn and get educated, and we take that information back to our communities and create a neighborhood and a community and a new way forward. Thank you very much for being here and listening to us, and I hope what we shared with you will help empower you and strengthen your vision and decrease the fear that you have, and know that we all stand together and we'll all help each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jennifer Hibbert, and all the participants of this fourth of 5 panels. So we are not quite done yet. As the need to build a better way has become clearer and clearer, and as we have heard about the birthday of the World Council for Health, and as we have seen, I hope all of you have seen the birthday cake that has been prepared, we would like now we'd like to invite you now to a piece of our birthday cake, which will be cut by Dr. Tess Laurie and Shabnam Paleza Mohammed from the World Council for Health Steering Committee. And we invite everyone to have a piece as long as it lasts. We will come through with a small cart, so no need to come all to the stage. You can also go and grab a coffee. We would like you to come back to the final panel here at 20 minutes past 5. That's okay with you. So we are a little bit lagging behind, but we hope that this short coffee break is needed and is deserved, and please have a piece of the birthday cake. Thank you very much.